My dad used to work for Textron in
really?
Providence.
Okay, yeah.
And in 1995, Bobby did a signing at Textron.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, besides my mom and dad, Bobby was actually the first human to know if I was going to be a boy or a girl, because he signed a hat for my dad that said Ben.
No
really?
way.
It was a whole thing. They didn't want to tell anybody. And
Wow.
So it was kind of like,
Look at that.
while he's here, like, can you sign this for Ben? Like,
Look
Full
at that
circle.
Yeah.
You still have that hat.
I still have it.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, so welcome back to another episode of In the Driver's Seat with ABS. You join us at our car storage facility. We have a very good, important guest with us today. Thank you so much, Bobby, for being here with us. We have the legendary Bobby Rahal in Newport, and you're visiting us, and you joined our motorsport club.
Right.
So thanks for joining us. You get to spend time with the Three Stooges. So
Bobby's been around town today so far at the museum. We're at car storage now.
Yeah.
you had lunch at Wally's.
Wiener.
Yeah, let's go.
All right, so how was Wally's?
It was
We need a
awesome.
review.
It was great. It's. I want to go there for dinner tonight, I think.
All right.
Nice.
Do it.
Well, we got a party tonight, so maybe tomorrow we'll go
Maybe
there for
tomorrow.
breakfast, grab a breakfast burger or something.
The highlight so far, we've been talking for about 3 minutes and we were already talking about Carrera GT, so
Yes.
you know it's going to be good. He was showing us a picture of his Carrera GT, which really cool, not only story, but your son reimagines or you can send it to him, recommissions, you can
Right.
send it to him, and
Right.
kind of he'll make your dream a reality with already a car that is is a dream for a lot of people, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's this is my second Carrera GT. My first one I got when they were new, and I made the mistake of selling it. Several years later, I was, of course, like many guys with cars, you get in the middle of a divorce, and you probably could use the money for something else. But just such an amazing car, and then the opportunity to get buy another one, and then have him recommission it, which is more than just looks, more than paint, more than interior. There's some mechanical aspects that are improved, I think, over the original stock car, but what an amazing car! Just the sound of the engine, that V10. I don't think there's a better sounding engine out there on the street, and so it's a thrill to drive. It's hard to drive because you just want to be going really fast all the time
Yeah.
It's just epitomizes what Porsche is all about in my mind, and so it's a thrill to have it.
Yeah.
So we always joke on the podcast that Porsche is the forbidden P word because we always end up talking about
Yeah.
Porsche.
Yeah.
And listen, we didn't really bring it up this time. So, but now that we're on the topic of it, how does your modern day or your Carrera GT that you have now on modern tires compare to a Carrera GT that you got new on maybe not as good tires as we have now?
Yeah, I mean, it was when the car was new. I had it at the Hilton Head car show. This is about 2004 probably, and we did some laps at Roebling Road, which is a racetrack just outside of Savannah, and it's got a long right-hand corner, very fast. And so I was giving rides for charities and what have you, and I just, it was very obvious very quickly that the car really had a high degree of oversteer in it. That it was so planted on the front that you really had to be careful with it. I think I read a report one time where Walter Roll, the rally driver, did some of the testing on the car and made the same comment. So for sure, I think if you weren't, it asked a lot of a professional driver to drive that car quickly. So for an amateur or for somebody who didn't drive that much but had the money to have one, that would be a situation that probably didn't end up very well.
Yeah.
But now I believe Michelin did a different type of tire for those cars not so long ago, and it's really a nice car now. But yeah, the first cars were pretty wicked.
That's wild. Yeah, I mean, you hear unfortunately the horror stories of them, and I mean, you can see why that happens with how violent they are. And, you know, I'm sure the viewer knows your really incredible racing career. And, you know, I'd like to talk about your 86 Indy 500 win. I mean,
Sure.
Talk us through that. Like, what a grueling race. And one thing that comes to mind is it always makes me laugh when you hear people say that race car drivers are not athletes.
I love that comment.
Yeah.
It's like sit in a car for an hour and not be able to
Not
get
even
out.
an hour.
Yeah.
Well, talk us through your win, but also, you know, how does that make you feel when you hear a comment like that?
Well, it's they don't have a clue, obviously.
True.
No, I mean, you even have, you know, over the years I've befriended, you know, athletes, you know, people who were top-notch athletes in various parts of the world of sports, but who also liked cars, drove cars, and for, you know, they would get in a race car and they'd come back, you know, after 10 laps, just like with their tongue sticking out and, you know, full of sweat. You know, a great friend of mine is Robin Yount, Hall of Fame baseball player. Robin he did dirt bikes, he did cars, even while he was playing baseball, and he'd be the first to tell you that and he was, you know, 2-time player of the year, you know, just over 3,000 hits. I mean, this guy was a stud, and he can tell you that the demands in racing are, anybody who makes comments like that really doesn't understand what it's all about. And we see that at times when people that don't race come to our races. For example, IndyCar, they always have two-seat Indy cars there they give rides to.
They can't keep their head up.
Oh yeah, people get out of those things and they're going, "Oh my God, I had no idea." And so it is. It's totally. Everybody thinks it's like driving your car around the street, and it has nothing to do with that.
Racing to me is almost like, let me know what you think about this. It's almost like another level of hand-eye coordination, because it's not just hand, eye, feet, but it's control of the car and how your movements interpret that.
I think the biggest challenge in racing is the ability to concentrate for very long periods of time. You know, the year I won Indy, that was the first race that was completed in under 3 hours. So prior to that, every race was over 3. And you know, even when you're under yellow, or even when you're making pit stops, you almost have to focus even more intensely, because it's real easy to either make a mistake or get caught up in somebody else's mistake. And especially in the days when I ran Indy cars, there were no speed limits in the pits. It was
Whoa.
As fast as you want.
Right.
So Indy, you're going 200 miles an hour in the pit lane, and
That's insane.
and you know, now they're doing 60. You know, but you know, you're the mental strength you have to have in order to be able to concentrate every split second for 3 hours is really it's unbelievable. And I think that's why you really see the guys who always won races had that ability to do that. There was a lot of guys that were fast, but they'd make mistakes, or something would happen during the course of the race and they'd be knocked out, or they'd have to make a pit stop or whatever it might be. But the guys who, you know, the Rick Mears or the Andretti's, or, you know, guys like that who were consistent winners, they were winners for not just because they had natural talent, but because they had the ability to harness that talent mentally. And I think that's the real key in racing.
Yeah. I mean, mindset's such a huge part of it, and so is your physical attributes. But would you say in your life, you know, was there something before you raced or as you were coming up that kind of built that mindset, or was it something you studied from someone else?
No, I mean, well, when you first start racing, the race is maybe 30 minutes long.
Right.
And then you make that next step. Now that race is an hour long, right? And then it's 2 hours long. So you kind of work into it over the years, but you're also testing a lot during that period of time. And I just think that, you know, it's, I don't know, I think you just acclimate yourself to it, or you just have that, you know, it takes work, but it just seems to come somewhat naturally. But still, it's, it's just something that I think some people have it. People have it to degrees.
Yeah.
The really good guys, they really have it, and then there's variations thereof. So it's it's just a human. It's part of being a human being, I guess.
Yeah.
So, I think we're kind of similar to you in the aspect that it seems like we all got our car passion from our dad, and you grew up watching your dad race Porsches and Alfa Romeos, and how was that as a kid to see your dad doing that?
Well, my dad was a SCCA, weekend warrior kind of racer, so we didn't race professionally. It wasn't like, unlike the Andretti's or the Unsers, where it was kind of like the family business. In my case, it was, my dad just raced for fun, but, I grew up in the 60s, and racing really took off in the 60s in this country, maybe around the world, but particularly in this country. You had series like Can-Am and Formula 5000 and others, and we would go to race. We go to Road America, Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, which was fairly local for us in Chicago, and the world came to that track. So as a kid, as a teenager, for example, going to those races, you'd see the best of the best. Bruce McLaren, Mark Donahue, Mario. I mean, all the great drivers. And so for a kid like me, who I already had the bug, thanks to my father, but it was just like amazing to watch. And you kind of would always dream, so, oh man, wouldn't that be cool, to be a race car driver? But that was never a consideration or an expectation for me, just because we raced for fun.
Yeah.
We didn't race as a living. And but luckily for me, when I started racing, while I was in college in the early 70s, I started winning races, and for me it was just a matter of, we were somewhat successful this last year, let's see how good we'll do next year. And as long as I improved, I figured I'd give it a shot, and thankfully I kept improving. We had some down years in the beginning, but I never gave up, and that's part of it, I think, is if it's your passion, and it was mine for sure, you just do what it takes to get to where you want to go, and that's what we did. So
for me, it seems like the era that you raced in was really like a golden era with, race car drivers were like rock stars, and they are like rock stars today, but I feel like everything now, they're on such a regimented diet and exercise plan, and they have everything that's like, on Monday you do this and Tuesday you do that.
Pretty much.
How did it? Yeah. I mean, how was it living that golden era of being this racing rock star?
Well, it was, when I came into IndyCars in 1982, I was a rookie in 82. And at that time, you had guys that had been racing IndyCars for 20 years. You had Mario, you had Gordon Johncock, you had Bobby Unser, Al Unser, Johnny Rutherford, really famous names that had been racing IndyCars for 20 years and had a lot of following. And then starting in the late 70s, Rick Mears came in. And then in 82, I came in. Danny Sullivan came in, a number of other drivers, 83, Michael Andretti, Al Unser Jr. So now you got the old guard, and now you have the new guard. And I think that's what created a lot of the interest. You had fathers racing against sons, like in the Unsers. You had, also Andretti's for that matter. The series, it also coincided, interestingly enough, with the birth of ESPN. And ESPN needed content, so they really got into televising racing, and especially IndyCar racing. And so, all of a sudden, years earlier, they'd televise the Indy 500, but that'd be about it. Now they're televising everything, and so that did a lot to raise the level of interest in racing. Period, I think, in this country. And you're right though. I mean, I smoked, for many years. Al Jr. smoked. You get out of the car and have a cigarette. You don't see anybody do that anymore.
Yeah.
Were you heavily involved in the mechanical aspect of the cars, or was that?
Well, in the beginning, but no. By the time you get to the upper levels of racing, there's too much work to do. The complexity increases, obviously, and also the need to really focus on what you're doing, and
Right,
let the other people
exactly.
focus on what they're doing.
Yeah, and I'm sure you had people on your team where you could say exactly how you could explain how the car was acting, and they knew right away how to make that adjustment.
Up until 1987. 1987 is when the very crude, kind of simplistic data acquisition started to come in. But prior to that, and again, I think we talk about the mental side, but prior to that, it was really up to the driver to be able to go 100% on the track and feel the car. And then as you're coming to the pits, be able to communicate with their,
it's a
in
lot.
those days, it was your chief mechanic.
Yeah.
You didn't have engineers per se, maybe one.
Yeah.
But mainly it was your ability to communicate it to the people that were around you. And again, there may not be many people. When I started, we had like 6 or 7 people in the team. Hell, today, each driver in our team, IndyCar team, has maybe 20 people dedicated just to him.
Wow.
So, because now you've got all these engineers,
Yeah.
you got all this data that you're able to collect, and you need to be able to decipher and act upon. Well, in the early years of my career, that ability was, how fast can I drive the car, understand what the car is saying, and then communicate what the car was saying to me, to my chief mechanic, or maybe to the singleton engineer we might have. And it was all done verbally.
Yeah.
There was no printout of a sheet.
Right.
It was all done. And that's why I say I think some guys were like Mears, very successful, because they had a really strong ability to do that kind of thing. And those that didn't, they were not going to be as competitive.
Right.
So,
And I'm
but
sure
it was very again, it sounds simplistic, but I think the obligations or the demands on a driver were very different then than they are today, because you didn't have all that information.
Right.
So,
But I'm sure there was no better feeling when you had a car dialed in.
oh, for sure.
Yeah. Like when you and your chief
God,
mechanic were on it, it was probably.
Yeah. I mean, in 1984 and 85, my engineer was a young British fellow named Audrain Newey.
Yeah.
And you might know who Audrain Newey is. He's probably the greatest Formula One designer, engineer in history.
Wow.
And I kid with him because I tell him we trained him. But in 84, 85, he was my engineer, and it was just he and I. And we would spend tremendous amounts of time off, at the race weekend, but even when we got back home. We'd go have dinner, we'd go have breakfast, we'd talk. And really, towards the end of our relationship, before he went to another team, I mean, he would finish statements that I would,
Wow.
that I would
Yeah.
start, and vice versa. You really were on mentally you had a connection that I don't think I've ever had with anybody, including my wife, or it was just so intense, the relationship, that and it was so. You would dig down so deep in everything, trying to understand what the car was saying, and maybe make a change. Was that better or worse? Well, it was a little better here, but not so good there. Or okay, so then you have to judge. Okay, well, where do you want it to be? Which one do you want?
Exactly.
You can't have it
Yeah.
all. So which one do you want?
Compromise.
So it was really satisfying, really challenging at the time when you were able to put it all together.
So
Very cool.
you're part of a pretty small group of people who've won the Indy 500, but also have won it as a team leader, team principal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the feeling? I mean, how does it feel to win? But then how does it feel to win from not being in the car?
Well, I mean, for a driver, at least in the circles that I raced, winning the Indy 500 was the single most important, race you could win. In this country, or even around the world, if there's one race that people know of, it's the Indy 500. Mm-hmm. And that was even more so years ago. So that changes your life. It changes your career professionally, but it changes your life as well. And so that's just something that, I'm not sure how many other events in sports have the same effect. on a person's life and career. Maybe Augusta, the Masters in golf, or maybe Wimbledon in tennis. Maybe I don't know, but it had that kind of impact on you as a person and as a driver. So you'd have to say that was the biggest, the most important one. But the other races, obviously, every race is good to win.
Yeah, good feeling. So when did you understand that it was time to stop racing? Was that from an accident? Was it from just not being as fast? For me, I feel like it would be a really hard thing to give up when it's something that you love and you live.
Well, I always told myself that I would be honest with myself, and what I mean by that is over the years, I'd seen drivers who had been very successful at one period of time really lose the capabilities, whether it was not being in the right teams or whether it was them. A lot of guys. I retired at 45.
Wow.
And that's probably pretty old.
That's late.
Nowadays,
very late.
Right? I didn't start IndyCar racing until I was 29 because
so you're saying there's a chance. I'm 26.
There's no chance.
Yeah, not for you, but maybe for someone else.
When I started racing, you couldn't start racing until you're 21.
Okay.
So
you were late to that too, yeah.
Actually, it changed in 72 because that's when they changed the voting age in this country from 21 to 18. So therefore, I started racing when I was 20 in 1973. And then by the time all the ups and downs and all the graduation through the various levels, it took 5 years to get to the point of being able to go IndyCar racing. But I saw a lot of guys that you kind of feel sorry for them, but they weren't having any fun because the level of success wasn't there anymore, and they looked miserable. They talked miserably. They bitch and moan. It was always somebody else's problem or this or that, and I just said I'm not going to do that. And I think the biggest thing the biggest things that really drove my decision to retire was it used to be that I loved to go testing. And in those days, you could test as much as you wanted to, or as much as you had money to do so. Now it's starting to feel like work, going testing. I had started a car dealership in Pennsylvania, so I had that obligation. I had a family. You have that when you're young and single, the blinders that you have are, it's tunnel vision, right? And the older you get, your vision starts getting broader and broader. And I just felt like I wasn't willing to commit myself to it as I once did.
Yeah.
And I was on the podium the last couple of years of my career. I'm racing against guys that could be my son. I'm 45 and Paul Tracy's 20 or 21.
Wow.
But
that's pretty badass.
Yeah, it is badass.
Yeah, but I just felt like, what, now's the time.
Yeah.
And luckily I owned the team, or co-owned the team, so I was able to stay involved in racing, but just in a different, and you asked earlier, what's it like to win the race versus owner versus driver? There's nothing better than as a driver, because it has that effect that I said. But for an owner, when you're an owner, you really truly appreciate everything that goes into that win. A driver, I want to thank my team, I want to do this. Yeah, okay, fine. It's, some of that's, that's just, they have to say that, right?
Yeah.
Because most drivers, if they're worth anything, they say, well, if it wasn't for me, they wouldn't have won. So you got to have that ego, right?
Yeah, when you're a driver.
But when you're an owner, you really understand just,
all aspects of the business,
and how difficult it really is to put together a team that can operate like as a team, and that you, on that given day, that you are better than everybody else.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I want to go back to a point we were talking about just before this about, Sean was talking about tuning the car and going back and forth through mechanic. How do you feel, kind of jumping to present day, how do you feel about how, I think of Formula One and other leagues where many of the cars seem to be on an even keel. And because of all this data, they're able to make sure everyone is on almost an even playing field. Do you think that's taken some of the pizzazz out of racing, or some of the advantage, or just what is your opinion on it today?
I think it's there are still winners and there's still 10th place cars and 15th. I mean, I think
today we call them non-winners.
Yeah,
non-winners.
I think the ability to win is harder today because it is so restricted.
Right.
And the differences, the things that make the difference in between one car's speed and another are so small. And the demands on the drivers, again, when I started, you had different teams with different cars, different engines, and so the variation in that led to a lot of, it led to, on each race there was an unpredictability to it all. Today, especially in Formula One, there's a predictability because it is so technically based as a category. Red Bulls, if you put Max Verstappen in a 10th place car, he'd probably finish 8th maybe. Or you took that guy who finishes 10th and you put him in a Red Bull car, he's probably going to win. That's the impact that the car has and the engineering team has on the performance of that car. IndyCar racing is not anywhere near that sophisticated, so you tend to get more variation where you'll get 8 or 9 or 10 different winners in a season. Right?
Yeah, Indy's a lot more
Whereas
exciting
here,
to watch.
Verstappen won every race.
Right.
So it's a big difference, but still, when the amount of time we spend looking for just tiny little improvements, because those are the ones that make the difference. There's no big improvements to find anymore because they restrict you down so much. It just really comes down to the minutia and the little stuff.
So what you mentioned earlier that you own a series of car dealerships. What brought you to do that?
Well, I mean, when you go in, if racing's your career, you're not going to do that your whole life.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's very smart.
That's just a fact, And so, for me, I think for any athlete, but for me, during my time, it's like, okay, what are you going to do the second half of your life?
Yeah.
And being around cars all my life, my dad had sports cars all the time I was growing up. I worked in a Mercedes-Benz BMW dealership in school. In summers between years in school and college. I loved cars. It just seemed like, that seems like be pretty natural that, you're going to get into the car business, and that's what we did. We opened up in January of '89, so this will be our 35th year coming up, and which is pretty amazing when I think about it. And thank God we did, because I've made a lot more money in the car business than I ever made racing.
That's awesome. And talking about your legacy, your son is a racer as well. How does that make you, how proud are you to see him out there and you've passed on the baton? Sure,
very proud. I mean, it's like the family business, right?
Yeah.
You're always flattered. A father or parent's always flattered when their children want to do what they did. There's pros and cons to that, because when Graham first came to drive for us, and he had driven for the Haas team, Newman Haas, one of the best teams in the history of racing. Then he drove for Ganassi, same thing. Then he came to us, and I said to him, okay, now here's the trick. You're going to have to treat me like the owner, and I'm going to have to treat you like the driver, not like father and son.
Right. Yeah, it could be tough.
That sounds good. That's easy to say.
Yeah.
Really hard to put. I think if you talk to anybody, any family-run business, I think everyone would say that separation, how to treat each other is, to remove the family part of that family business out and treat each other kind of unemotionally. That's really hard. And but this will be, I think, our 10th year together coming up. And it's when we don't do well, when we don't give them a good car, obviously it frustrates me more maybe than if it had been somebody who wasn't my son, because now I'm kind of,
you feel responsible.
I have direction over my son's career, right?
Yeah.
But then when we give him a good car and he runs up front like he did a number of races this last year, then it's like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, it's got pluses and minuses.
Do you see things he does that you did maybe, and like just being your son? Like, there's always the Tiger Woods and Charlie Woods, his son.
Yeah,
He has this very similar mannerisms and when they play. So I was curious.
Well, I for sure when Graham was a little kid, if you would not be surprised as to where he is today if you knew him when he was 4 or 5 years old. It was pretty obvious that he's been into cars even in greater depth than me in terms of street cars, and that's been his life, really to a large degree. And I think he approaches racing as I did, or similar to the way I did, but I think maybe even to a higher level. He's a very good racer. May not qualify the best at times, but he's really good at when they drop the green flag on Sunday morning, and which is obviously, if you're going to perform, that's when to do it. Similar. I think probably he's a little maybe gutsier than I was, but racing's different today than it was then too. So
yeah, that's a great point. Do you find that the use of simulators has impacted racing? Like, do you feel like if you had a simulator when you were in your prime, learning tracks, and do you think that would be as effective?
I think simulators are really good if you have a driver who's not been to a track before, a circuit before, and they can go on the simulator, and when they go to the real track, they go, oh yeah, it looks just like that. Simulators, and whether it's in Formula One or maybe NASCAR, certainly with us in IndyCars, the whole key is how relevant is the simulator to the real world. Mm-hmm. If you find things in the simulator that you think make the car better, well, it doesn't make it better, and a lot of times it doesn't. It can be confusing.
Yeah.
And Formula One teams and like GM, Toyota, Ford are spending huge sums of money to continually try to improve the simulators so that they're really relevant to the real world.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing. We use Honda Simulator. They have a new one this year, which apparently is an improvement. But there's so much to it, and it's a continuing process that, yes, they do generate some value, but it's not like what you learn in the simulator immediately translates to the track.
Yeah, I haven't done a ton of track stuff, but Ben Chester and I were actually in a simulator tournament a couple summers ago, which was
we call it tech support.
Yeah,
because we're working.
We'll go to the museum and we'll be like, oh, we have tech support to do, and then play on the simulator.
We need 2 hours.
Come back sweating.
But the biggest thing for me with the sim, which kind of frustrated me, is it looks realistic, but you can't replicate that same feeling.
Well, it's go ahead.
Yeah, but it's just when you experience like actually being on the racetrack for real. There's just
it's crazy. We just had someone from McLaren here doing a little something with our MP4 race car that you'll see in a little while, and he was saying in Surrey they have a brand new simulator that's basically a carbon tub that's floating and has all kinds of different movements and stuff, but it's above and beyond all the other stuff that they've seen. And it's like, do they let you go on it? It's like, no, we might mess it up.
Well, our guys,
but they've come so far.
Yeah, our guys sit in a monocoque in the tub.
Yeah.
It's the steering wheel. Same. Yeah. Everything is exactly the same as it is in the real car.
Yeah.
But again, it's, for example, you really have to know what the tire model is. Tire dynamics to build the model. And Firestone doesn't give anybody, that kind of, that's their IP. And so you're kind of guessing.
Yeah.
Well, that can make a big difference in what the simulator's saying.
Right.
And a big difference. So it's, you're constantly tweaking everything, getting to where you think it might be. Mm-hmm. And then hoping that you haven't just burned up 8 hours of computer time and for nothing.
Yeah.
So it's a real challenge, and it's ongoing. We even do static simulators, which really have proven to be in many respects, just as good as with the DIL, you know, the driver in loop, where you're in the car and it's moving and all this other stuff. The static actually is not too bad.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a lot of work to do yet on that, and people have been working on that for a decade at least, maybe more. So it's, you know, it's a big challenge. Takes up a lot of people and a lot of money.
Tech support.
Tech support. That's right.
Yeah.
Call us. We'll come and help.
All right.
One thing that really kind of piques my interest is your involvement now with Moto America.
Yeah.
And you know, Ducati is by far my favorite brand ever. I love Ducati motorcycles, and it seems like they're kind of in a golden era right now with winning 2 MotoGP championships, 2 World Superbike championships, and also 2 Moto America Supersport championships on the Panigale V2. And you and your son have a team now.
Right.
And what I think is super cool is I grew up watching Ben Spies, Elbows, race bikes, and he's going to be your team principal. That's right. That's awesome.
Well, I've been a big fan of you know, bike racing for many years. You know, when I raced in Europe in the late '70s, Kenny Roberts was the king. You know, he was there. He was there. I got to know guys like Freddie Spencer and Eddie Lawson. You know, I mean, actually Eddie raced IndyCars in '93 when I was there as well, and got to know him. And I knew Freddie through Honda. You know, good guys, but great, unbelievable racing. And so, you know, Graham he has 2 Ducati dealerships in Cleveland and in Pittsburgh, in Indianapolis. And so I think, it's really good for his business to have an involvement in that. But I really think that road racing's really, Moto America's done a great job. Wayne Rainey, I've gotten to know well, and he's got good people around him. And so, you know, I think it's starting to get back to where it once was in this country when you had Roberts and you had all those other guys, you know, Bubba Schobert. And I mean, when you look in the 90s and, well, 80s, 90s, it was dominated by Americans.
Yep.
Right? And it wasn't just Kenny Roberts, you know, or it wasn't just Freddie Spencer. There were others. So, you know, I just really like that form of racing. And so for us, it makes sense from our business standpoint, but I also think it makes sense for us to, you know, kind of offer, kind of added onto the menu that we can provide companies that we're talking to about sponsorship. Oh, well, you can do IndyCar racing. Also, we have these races in Moto America. And you know, we're in Super Sport this coming year, but obviously the goal for us is Superbike.
Yeah.
And but we have to walk before we can run. But I think having Ben, you know, run the team, I think is going to shorten that learning curve for us quite a bit.
Well, he's a great mentor for those guys racing as well. Being you know, he won the Superbike championship, obviously, well, AMA back in the day, and also MotoGP race winner. It's not something that everyone can say that they've done, which I think is awesome.
Right.
I might need to order a set of yellow track fairings for my Panigale.
I know where you can get those.
No deals though.
Yeah, that's all right. That's fine. But yeah, Bobby, thank you so much. This has been great. And
I actually had a quick Bobby Rahal story to share.
Oh yeah. No,
I don't know.
Go right ahead.
We'll see how Bobby reacts to this. But my dad used to work for Textron in Providence.
Okay. Yeah.
And in 1995, Bobby did a signing at Textron.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, besides my mom and dad, Bobby was actually the first human to know if I was going to be a boy or a girl, because he signed a hat for my dad that said Ben.
No way.
It was a whole thing. They didn't want to tell anybody. And
wow.
So it was kind of like, while he's here, like, can you sign this for Ben? Like,
full circle.
Yeah. You still have that hat.
I still have it.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah. Textron was a sponsor of ours for a number of years, and used to come to Providence, you know, occasionally.
Yep.
You know, I think the best memory about that is in '92, which was my last championship win. They had the first IndyCar race at New Hampshire Speedway. Mm-hmm. And I had Textron on the car, and I won the race.
Yeah.
And you know, that winning races is a great way of keeping sponsors.
Yeah. Everybody's happy.
Everybody's happy.
It's all sad.
Yeah. And so, those were good days.
Good
really
deal.
Good days.
That's a great story.
A little full circle.
That's
Hell
so
cool. Cool.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you're listening, give us a thumbs up. If you're watching, give us a thumbs up. Put something in the comments. We appreciate that. And remember to subscribe.